All right. It is our duty, living world, to tether our hearts and bind our actions to truth, to assemble our voices and sing in solidarity, to end this contemporary catastrophe, this genocide. Settler colonial forces know nothing of peace, only violence and encroaching upon things not theirs. The president speaks and all I hear are bodies falling from his mouth. US-backed tanks, US-backed bombs. But our songs, beloveds, the ones that form a fist, the ones that take a shape of resistance, the ones that sound of collective liberation, will beckon our new beginnings. Join us and sing. Condemn this collective punishment. No more death. Cease fire now. End the occupation. Free Palestine. This poem was written by my dear friend and Colorado's youngest and first poet laureate of color, Bobby Lefebvre. My name is Jumana Salami, Deputy Director of the Arab American National Museum and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair for Access. Before we begin today's conversation, I'd like to ground us and recognize that we gathered today on Anishinaabe land in the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and other indigenous peoples' land as being the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Today's program will guide the audience across topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, community safety, and belonging. We will ask that you come into the space seeking a better understanding of how communities of color can come together and thrive, as well as to think about what truly solidarity looks like in the communities that we live in, work, and go to school in. I'd like to introduce Annie Nasser, who will be moderating today's conversation. Annie is an Ismaili Muslim born in Tanzania and moved to the US at the age of 10 to live with her brother and sister-in-law, which are Hanif's parents. She was one of the very first to hold Hanif when he was born, and her bond and love for him was solidified from that moment on. She was part of his daily life for his first 6 years of life until she moved out on her own and then to Toronto, Canada in 1982. She graduated from York University with a degree in political science and went to get her early childhood education designation. She has owned and operated child care centers since 1991. Her passion continues to be in her volunteer work with various organizations, including Providence Healthcare, the Aga Khan Foundation, Arthritis Society Canada, and the Aga Khan Museum and Park. Her greatest joy comes from her interactions with family, and to be here with Hanif is truly emotionally heartwarming for her. Annie?
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you. It is truly my honor and privilege to be here with you guys tonight, and I am so, of course, very proud of my nephew, and so glad that he invited me to join him, and to you all for having me here tonight. I'm excited about tonight. I was born in Morogoro, Tanzania, and as Jumana mentioned, I moved eventually to Canada. And yet, when I think back, that sense of home is still Tanzania. I'm a Canadian, and in Canada, I get to celebrate being a Canadian. I get to celebrate being an Ismaili Muslim Canadian. And, but with all this strife that's happening around the world, I know it impacts, the ripple effects of it really impact all of us. And I know we're all in that feeling of deep pain about what's happening. And I'm hoping that tonight kind of gives us a path, a map, something that's forward-looking and allows us to kind of think about what steps and what we can do to ease not only ourselves, because we internally are all crying as well, right? But how do we heal our community? How do we move forward? And I know with these two at the helm, hopefully we come to some kind of understanding tonight. So with that, it is my absolute privilege to introduce you to, well, many of you know her, but Rima Maruesh. Marwe, thank you. Since joining Access as the Advocacy and Community Engagement Manager, Rima's role has allowed her to focus her efforts on this imperative work. She has been instrumental, particularly in cultivating and strengthening Access relationships in DC with policymakers and other advocacy organizations, while working to ensure voices and stories are heard. These relationships are critical to the work being done here in Michigan and on a national level, and will allow them to focus on efforts strategically and collectively in partnership with the wonderful staff and departments of Access that are also working in the area of advocacy. Rima graduated from Wayne State University with a master's degree in Near Eastern Studies and has an additional master's degree in dispute resolution, also from Wayne State University. Rima has been an active member of the community for many years, previously working in positions with the Arab American Chamber of Commerce, as well as with Life for Development and the United Church of Christ's Media Empowerment Project nationally and internationally. Please welcome Rima. I would also like to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Hanif Fazal, my nephew. Hanif has spent over 20 years working directly with students and families of color, as well as supporting educators and school districts in building the capacity to advance equity and inclusion throughout their educational systems. He is currently the co-founder of the Center for Equity and Inclusion, and is also a writer who writes about the fight for freedom, joy, and belonging in Black and Brown communities. He is the author of a new book titled An Other World. An Other World offers a hopeful path forward by nurturing identity and centering community. It's a path where joy is the norm rather than the struggle, where school and work are inclusive rather than exclusionary, and where Brown and Black relationships lead to a unique experience of freedom. Along with local and national news and podcast experiences, Hanif has spoken at South by Southwest, at the National Equity Summit, a two-time presenter at the Courageous Conversations About Race Summit, and at many other equity and education-focused events. He is the National Pew Civic Change Award winner, Multnomah County Hilltop Award winner, and most recently was awarded the Taste of Portland's Changemaker Award for his prolonged impact on equity and inclusion throughout Portland. Please welcome Hanif. And with that, I'll just get to the questions. So Rima, you're so immersed in the community. How would you describe the experience of the Arab American community right now? What are you hearing or sensing that the community needs right now?
I think, the last few weeks have been a sense of abandonment from a lot of communities, from everyone. It seems like we are the only ones who are screaming, "Stop killing children," as if it's being presented as a political issue. The lives of children are being presented as a political issue. The lives of people in Palestine are being presented as a political issue. And we have been saying for such a long time, since this all started, and really for decades, what Palestinians have been experiencing. And so in a moment where we are calling for the killings to stop, it seems like everyone is staying quiet. And the reason they're staying quiet is the thing that I fear the most. It's not just that people are staying quiet, it's that people are staying quiet in fear of being called anti-Semitic. And that to me is probably one of the scariest moments. And I know we can talk a little bit about that later, but one of the things that's scary about that is that also means that people have taken the side based on really a false dichotomy, right? So what people really need right now, what our community needs is, right now we're just calling for a ceasefire. We're not talking about political solution. We're not talking about any of that. We need everyone calling on that. And it feels like right now we are the only ones calling for that. And so I think what the Arab American community really is asking for right now is everyone just call for stopping of the killings. And it's as simple as that. It's being portrayed as a complicated issue, but that's really what people need right now. They need everyone to ask for a ceasefire and to stop killing children and stop killing Palestinian people. And it just feels like that's not happening. No one is, not very many people have been doing that, and I think are just now starting to, after the death toll reached 11,000. Can we? I actually would love to ask that of the audience as well. If we have Arab Americans who would like to share, what are you needing right now? What are you seeing is happening in the community? Is there anyone? I hope, it always feels awkward when we're kind of standing up, sitting in front of an audience, especially the way that it's set up right now. But we hope to, especially that we have a smaller crowd, I always prefer to have a conversation. And I know Hanif is the star of the show here. And I definitely, I want to talk about your book for one reason, but we'll come back to that. But I know Hanif is the star of the show, and we can, for those of you who have read the book, I hope you bring in the stories in the book as we talk about this. But it's let's make this a conversation. Let's not make this like, we're sitting up here. So this is a conversation about, Hanif was supposed to talk about his book today and has graciously opened this space to be able to talk about, I think there's something very real in this issue that calls for solidarity. But we'll talk a little bit more about that, about what that means, especially in this moment. But I think if we can do this as a conversation, it would be a lot easier. I know I see some faces in here that have a lot of opinions. So if anybody has any thoughts, we'd really love to hear. And of course, don't feel obligated. But I want to kind of like just make you feel more comfortable. Let's have this more as a conversation than just me and Hanif sitting up here. So.
I can come to you. Or I could just talk from here. So I think that right now, for me personally, it's been a battle between the emotional side of things versus also wanting to just like keep the focus on Islamophobia and how dangerous it is. And then also kind of wanting the American public to understand that our foreign policy is against their self-interests. And I think it's been just challenging trying to navigate how to do that while also like, keeping the emotions tempered to like, for me, for example, I have a lot of friends from a lot of different backgrounds. And if I've shared laughs, moments, food with you, and I feel like you can't even mutter a simple ceasefire, it's very tough for me to continue to, in an understanding way, explain to you how important this is. That's all.
Can I ask just one follow-up? It seems like there's so much emotion. Like, what emotion for you is on the daily? Like, I just think it's important.
I think it's like, tradition. And I think for me personally, I'm just waking up to a lot of the cultural aspects that I grew up on. And like, so for example, this is not the most politically correct statement, but I grew up like kind of pushing back on like being old school and trying to get my parents and my family to, modernize. Now it's the opposite. I'm kind of appreciating the need for that and appreciating, like I have a newfound understanding and new respect for why they had to be so stubborn to their traditions, why they had to be so neglecting of change, because our people are dying and they have been dying for a long time. Our stories are dying with them. Our traditions, all of this stuff, our culture, if they're not gonna hold on to it, then who will? So I think that's where, like, even right now as I'm talking, I'm a little choked up about it. I'm a little tense about it. It's a need for keeping us alive in a certain aspect.
So, Rima, in light of that, what are some of the challenges you see in to kind of build a coalition to call for a ceasefire? And this may be connected to that question. Do you think the other communities around us feel safe to even challenge or be critical of the Israeli-Palestine situation?
So I want to tell you all something that's been happening with a lot of us at Access. We hear, I'm sure you all have seen every statement that has been put out in support of not Israeli people, but in support of the Israeli government, which is very different, right? I understand supporting the Israeli people through what has happened. I don't understand supporting a government that has literally killed 11,000 people, 5,000 of which are children, right? That I don't understand. But yet, we have a lot of people that have been putting out these statements. And what is interesting about that is the same people that are putting out these statements are then privately reaching out to us, and I know a lot of people of my coworkers here have had this experience, privately reaching out to us and saying, we are so sorry this is happening to Palestinian people. We are here with you. But the message that you get there is we're here with you privately, right? We're not here with you publicly. We're not going to stand up and say, stop killing them. We're here with you privately. That just says how people are feeling, right? People are understanding what is happening, but have a fear of actually speaking out and are afraid to say stop the killing because of how dehumanized Palestinian people have become. The language has become so dehumanizing that we are now equating, if we talk about a Palestinian life, it is considered anti-Semitic. That is very dangerous. That is the reason that so many people, so I think to answer your question, people are very afraid to speak up, because they're willing to do it with us privately, but they're not willing to do it publicly. What we need right now is solidarity, and I know we're going to get into that conversation. That's what this is all about. Hanif's book is about Black and Brown solidarity, but we need solidarity beyond that, right? We need solidarity from communities of color more broadly, but I think those are the things I think that not only the challenges, but where we have seen. Where we have seen some of these biggest challenges.
One thing, I appreciate you naming this, the fear around challenging or being critical of the Israeli government. And I just want to name that this is the way oppression works, in that we're feeling it acutely in the Arab American experience right now, and Black communities have felt it across Native communities. So when we are critical of, when Black Lives Matter decides to make a stand or you decide to kneel at a game, all of a sudden you're anti-American, right? And so I think part of the playbook, and I think why solidarity is always so important around white supremacy, is to always divide and conquer. Part of the other playbook is that the moment you challenge, right, you become un-American, you become anti-Semitic, you become whatever it ends up being. So there's there's consequence associated with that, right? So there's resources that can be taken away from that. There's, exclusion that can be a result of that. I really appreciate you naming and I just want to keep naming, it's absolutely what's happening, and it is what happens, and how part of how oppression plays out.
And I want to point out that you can criticize the U.S. government all you want, and there's no law that prevents you from doing that, but there are currently laws that are trying to be pushed that would criminalize calling out the Israeli government. So let that sink in.
Hanif, in your book, you talk a lot about the power of Black and Brown communities and what we can do together. Can you, in light of what's happening right now, can you talk a little bit more about that?
So I think we have an interesting situation when it comes to solidarity building across Black and Brown communities. And I think there's some unique things that play out, specifically when we talk about the Arab American community, or in general, just immigrant communities as they come to the U.S. And so let me just talk about two things that I think is kind of a unique challenge that I see in this community, and I see kind of in many immigrant communities. One is that when we talk about solidarity building, ultimately what we're talking about is relationship. And are we really in relationship with one another? And I think sometimes we think just because there's we've both experienced depression, that automatically means we're good. We're in a relationship. Our relationship is based on you experience depression in this moment, I experience depression in this moment, and therefore we somehow should be kind of good. Except part of what we're seeing is that when acute moments of oppression show up, everyone else is kind of not showing up in solidarity one way or the other. So I don't really actually believe we're actually in relationship with one another. I don't actually believe the Arab American community is in solid relationship with the Black community. I don't think the Latino community is in solid relationship with the Black community. I don't think we're, and so it's part of the writing of the book was trying to begin to unpack a little bit on the interpersonal level. And two things that I've noticed that is kind of a unique challenge. One is that so many immigrant ethnicities that come to the U.S., Arab Americans as well, and I've heard this in lots of different ways, don't identify racially. So they're not necessarily seeing, my dad never would have identified as brown. Even to this day, he wouldn't call himself brown. He would, if I said, hey Dad, what are you? He identified geographically. He might say, I was born in Tanzania, I'm Indian, I'm all this kind of stuff. But being brown wasn't a thing. And to this day, he wouldn't. And I think this is one of the unique challenges, which is Black folks are clearly racialized in this country and are experiencing race. And all immigrant communities, almost all immigrant communities come to this country, and it's almost like I'm not racialized, even though I'm entering into a space that's highly racialized. And my job is just to put my head down, work hard, and in some ways assimilate in. And in many ways, brown folks have taken the contract that white people have kind of given them, which is the more you assimilate, the closer you can get. The more proximity you build to whiteness, the more privilege or opportunity you get, even if that means you don't get all of the privileges one way or the other. And so it's just one of those unique challenges in which you have one group who is racialized and deep and seeing race and experiencing race right from the start. Another group who is not even racializing their experience, even though they're experiencing it in one way or the other. And so I think there's a natural disconnect there, right? And part of that not racializing is just this movement towards whiteness, right? So how do I lose the accent? How do I, whatever it ends up being. And so there's something there that I think sometimes gets in the way. And I think you connect that with the other thing that I think is really unique, which is our brown people's relationship to Blackness, period. And I think something that we have not been necessarily honest about in community, any brown community, is the way anti-Blackness lives in our communities. So for me, the reality is that we bring kind of negative associations to Blackness, the coloring of Blackness, the race, into this country, right? And in assimilating in trying to get closer to whiteness, in doing all this stuff, we actually distance ourselves from Black people, right? And so I'm more likely to hear from brown folks when Black people are struggling, what's their problem? Why can't they just work harder? Or why can't they just we just did this, or we just did that, or look how far we got, or until we have these moments, and then we're suddenly very brown. We're very brown in these moments all of a sudden. We're where's the solidarity, right? But when the Native experience is happening, we're not necessarily there. We're saying, oh, come on. When Black, wow, come on. All those kinds of things. So we haven't really actually looked at or been honest, I think, enough to actually say, are we even down with Black people? Really? Where are our own biases showing up, where our own prejudice live, right? And how does that play out? And when I see it play out, oftentimes the way it plays out is in silence. We see discrimination happening to a Black person in the space, and we're more likely not to stand up and say something one way or the other, right? We kind of subtly blame one way or the other. And we more or less don't show up in real solidarity. So when we need solidarity, we're like, hey, where is everyone else? They're experiencing oppression. Why aren't they here, right? Can you imagine what Native Americans are thinking in this? Like they're actively experiencing genocide, have been actively experiencing erasure, and no one's showing up in any kind of way, right? So, and I think brown folks think that black people don't notice this. I really think that Arab Americans, Latinos, name the brown community, think that our anti-blackness is somehow hidden from black people, but it's so evident for them, right? So why would black folks come and be in solidarity with folks who, on one level, almost look down on them or are trying to actively move away from them? Not just away, move towards the very thing that is oppressing black folks, and by the way, is oppressing us as well, right? From a black perspective, it wouldn't make any sense to me, other than, hey, out of just value around oppression, value around black life, understanding what it means to not have your life matter at all, or having to plead the case for your life to matter, and then have anybody stand up for that to say, like, oh, all of a sudden you're racist. Like, out of that level of integrity, I can imagine black folks showing up just out of a care for life, and right? But on the whole, how can I be in solidarity with something that doesn't genuinely want to be in relationship with me, right? Or has inherent biases around me? So I think when we talk about solidarity, I think sometimes we think about, oh, we have to reach out to the black community. And my first thing is actually, before we reach out, we as a brown community need to reach in and have a good hard look at where we are in relationship to blackness. And it's I'm always conscious of when I'm in all brown spaces speaking like this, because I know it may bring up lots of different things for people. It's just what I have seen and experienced again and again in so many different spaces. And so I think that hard look and those kinds of conversations are pivotal. Like we're not quite getting how anti-blackness or even striving to proximity to whiteness is actually getting in our own way. We're not actually seeing that. And so I think there's some real work for us to be in conversation around what is our relation to blackness? How does that show up? Why have we signed that contract with whiteness that says, hey, the closer you get, and we've kind of fallen into that. And where is it actually not just hurting black folks, it's also hurting us? And so to me, that's the first step. I mean, we can look at it from we talked about this earlier, skin whitening creams, to put an umbrella on when the sun's out, to like name it again and again, the ways in which we've tried to, and anywhere you go, whiteness has currency, anywhere you go. And so there's some examination, I think, for any brown community to be like, has that served us?
You just laid it down.
Did you feel that?
Absolutely, thank you.
How so? How does it? How do you? Is it just?
That's what I want. Oh, okay.
Talking
out loud. You were no. Okay, sorry.
But let's be real.
I was okay. I'm actually quite articulate, so I'm going to be able to say this. First of all, thank you for naming that, because all what you said was true and true. It is very hard to be in solidarity when I know that I'm naturally looked down upon, and I'm considered in the black community and all communities dark skinned. So I don't even have to say anything, I just show up. And I just also want to do a heads up, I'm from Toronto as well, so what I'm talking about is not American. My family's from the Caribbean, so I'm first generation Canadian. So it's in the islands as well. So it's just perpetuated over and over again. But I've never heard it from a brown person acknowledging that. So I was just like, where's the couch so I can, I was in therapy. I'm like, this man, like, are you looking at me? How dare you talk to me? Keep going. Because just as you were saying, Rima, about being seen, that's how we want to be seen, we as black people. And I can't speak for all, but I'm going to speak for all just for a quick second. And just knowing that you know that we are all some of us want to help out, but then once the job is done, like when there's some movement, we get let go. It's like, for me, middle school, it's like I'm with my friends, I'm cool, and then when they find a cooler group of people with more street cred, we get dropped. And my girlfriend and I have talked about this because I'm here with her, so this is where she works, and we've talked about this over and over. And okay, I've just lied. We've cried about it over and over again, and talked and cried about it in different ways. And it's just nice to know that it's not just me. I know that it's real, but it's in the community that I'm with, which is the Black community. And it's so, I cannot wait to read your book. Is this upside down? I cannot wait. It's so, thank you. And hearing this conversation, the communicating is just saying that's how we come together, is acknowledging, saying, I know you've been treated wrong. I'm not the one that treated you wrong. Come with us, let's do it. And when it's your turn, we'll do this to fight oppression, because it is white supremacy. And there's allies in every community. We just have to find them and stop being fair weather friends. So thank you.
Oh, I have so much to add about this, Hanif. Where do I start? So first, I just want to say about the book, if you haven't read it, you definitely should read it. I think before even going to the question, one of the things the book was really beautiful in doing is centering our experiences within the Black experience, the framework of Black experiences, where, if you all know, we are counted as white in all federal data, right? And so I think that in itself has created a situation where we have almost just naturally been associated as white community. And I think we have absorbed that as a community to some degree, right? And so I think reading your book just felt like, Jumana was talking about this, is like, oh my gosh, yes, it almost, you were talking about, it gave you permission to talk about your experiences within the framework of Black experiences, not within the framework of white experiences, right? And then that takes me to what you asked, which is that when we talk about our experiences as Arab Americans, I do policy work. We look at policies that impact Arab Americans, and one of the things that we always go back to, we look for systemic changes, right? We're not looking for putting a Band-Aid, and the only way to do that is to go to what is the root of this, and the root of all of it is policies and a government that was created to keep Black people out. Right? If we can say that, if that can be our framework, and then we are then looking at the root causes of any policy, and you're tackling it from the root, right? And so when we think about, let's say, the Patriot Act. After 9/11, you have the Patriot Act that was passed. The reason that passed in the first place was because there is a system in government that allows for the exclusion of communities, because there is a system that allowed for the exclusion of Black people, right? The Patriot Act was used to surveil Muslim and Arab communities, but it was then used to surveil Black Lives Matter movements. So we are all in the same boat. We can associate toward whiteness, as Hanif was talking about, or we can actually acknowledge that we are all impacted by the same systems, and we can be working in solidarity to tackle those systems, right? So that's, that is from the other thing that I want to talk about is, I think you asked the question about some of the similarities in our movements. As there's the Palestinians and Native Americans have both experienced settler colonialism, right? Someone said something to me recently that technically we are all settler colonialists. Every single one of us, we are in the land of Native Americans, right? So we are all settler colonialists. And so we either can acknowledge that and try to repair that, or we continue to ignore it, right? And that's another place where we can come in solidarity. Again, the policies that impact Black people are the same policies that impact us. We can either put a Band-Aid on it, or we can tackle just the Patriot Act, which is what happened, or we can tackle the systems that allowed for the Patriot Act to be passed in the first place, which is a much more systemic change. So when it comes to calling for solidarity, one of the things I've heard a lot from Arab Americans, and I say this not as a way of calling out, but as a way of really, for us as a community to really think about what it means to be in solidarity. I would say this is a moment more than ever where we need solidarity. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we in a position where it's fair for us to ask for that solidarity when we haven't shown up for other communities as a community? Yes, there are individuals that have shown up, but I guess the question we have to ask ourselves, is this the time where we can ask for solidarity? I would say we can ask for it, but we shouldn't expect it, right? We can ask because we need it right now, because Palestinians need it right now, but we cannot expect it because we have not shown up as a community for Black people. We have not shown up for Native Americans. So I would say, is there a time for us to do that? No, there's never a right time. We can ask for it right now, but that work of solidarity needs to continue throughout, even after this conflict is over. We need to continue to build solidarities because at the end of the day, as communities of color, we are all impacted by the same systems, by systemic racism, right? We are not, as Arab Americans, as brown communities, we are impacted by systemic racism. So that work of solidarity, we can call, again, I'll say it, we can ask for it, but we cannot expect it.
I love this conversation because I think there's two things I think are coming up for me. One is just like, what does it mean to be in relationship? Like, I think ultimately this is about relationships and what does it actually mean to be in relationship with Black folks if we're brown if we're Black, whatever it ends up being, and what is the internal work we have to do in order for that to happen. The other is a little more for me as a framework it just brought me up when you're thinking about this, which is I don't fully think the everyday person of color understands how intertwined these systems are. And so as much as like Arab Americans may not understand the connection between Palestine and what's happening to Black folks in Detroit, or name the community, Black folks are also not making the connection between what's happening in Ferguson and Palestine, what's happening here. Like, nobody's actually able to understand that, we're all operating under state-sponsored violence or state-sponsored exclusion or state-sponsored oppression, like state-sponsored, right? And so we're not understanding that. We're not necessarily making the connection that, okay, if we're all actually, like, I think we just become so US-centric or whatever our group is, that we're not actually saying like, okay, wow, there is a deep connection. The actual same overarching kind of system that is is playing out in Palestine, the exact same playbook in so many different ways is what plays out in all these other areas. And so all of us haven't, I think as a community of color, been able to see like, oh wow, these same systems, the same thing are playing out, and we have instead kind of said, for whatever reason, whether it's our own anti-Blackness or whether it's our own just kind of in our own survival mode or just our own kind of lack of knowledge around it, just kind of stayed in our lanes, right? And yes, when it becomes too much, we may show up, but generally we don't. And certainly the times when we do, it's when these moments happen. But there tends to be these in-between spaces between. Like, we know there's going to be a next George Floyd. Like, we know that some version of it's going to show up because the system is built to keep churning those out. And we know the Palestinian thing, we know it's just been, right? So we just know these things are going to come. But it seems to be there's these moments of just the wave is gone back, the water's gone back out, the wave's going to come back in. We're not good in those moments, actually, of saying, hey, this is the moment, actually, when we should be really invested in building relationships, building ties, breaking down the barriers, repairing the connections. We don't actually, in those moments, do that. Instead, I don't know, I just think mainly, maybe this is how white supremacy works. It just wears us out so much that in those moments, we're just like, let me just breathe for a second here and like play with my kids. And I think I can smile right now. I think nothing's happening right now, so we can have fun right now. Okay, like I think we do all those things. And I think this gets us in trouble. And part of, again, what I wanted to do in the book was also think about, so again, if all of our solidarity building is in relationship to just surviving or is in relationship to just fighting, even the idea of solidarity building then becomes really taxing, right? And I wonder if solidarity could also be not just something we do to survive, or not just do something to fight, but actually solidarity building could actually be where we actually find joy, where we are actually thriving, where like when we're in real relationship with, we actually, as different as our cultures are, there's so many similarities. There's so many connections to being in like other-centered cultures and cultures that are centered in relationships, centered in family, centered in respect. I mean, I go on and on and on in the similarities that exist within Black and brown cultures. So there's so much to like actually gain and receive, and so much that is life-giving, not just life-preserving. And I think sometimes when we think about solidarity building, we come at it from a life-preserving space versus a life-giving space. And I think those are inherently some of the things that get us in problems. Because if it is just about life preserving, I don't know if I want to spend the time doing that, because I'm just tired already, right? So it's just something for us to think about.
You know, Hanif, this reminds me of a conversation you and I were having earlier, and one of the things we were talking about was if you think about, for any of you that have attended racial equity trainings or racial justice trainings, those trainings tend to be in our own communities, right? If you're white, it tends to be in the white communities. If you're Arab, it happens within the Arab spaces, and no one really steps outside of their comfort zones. And so we only come together when things like this happen, right? And so your mind is automatically coming together with some kind of crisis. And so what we've talked about at Access is how do we step outside of our comfort zone to where we are bringing people together outside of crises, right? And that's what you're talking about with the joy. How do we learn to step outside of our comfort zone to find moments of joy together? Because that's at the end of the day what's going to create that solidarity, right? Yeah. But we only come together when it's moment of crises, or when it's maybe for a training, or maybe something work related. It's never in these moments of joy where we can really build this long-term solidarity. And that's something we've struggled with at Access, right? How do we do that? How do you create these spaces where people can truly come together in cultural spaces, or even within an Arab organization? How do you create spaces where Black people are comfortable, right? Those are all things like, and what you talked about earlier was, if this is always in your mind, then you will find ways to do it, right? If you're always questioning, are we creating inclusive spaces? Are we making sure that everyone is comfortable in these spaces? If you don't ask those questions, you may just lose out on that opportunity to find moments where you can bring people together. And I think those are questions we just have to continuously ask. Yes, please.
I love what you're saying. In those moments of joy is, don't come together when there is a crisis. So all right, here's a quick one that I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Black History Month. Do that, because it's a celebration of Black history. Do it then. We don't even have to talk about anything heavy, because I agree with you. So as to your point, the tide is out. Do it when the tide is out. Don't do anything. Don't bring pamphlets. Don't do anything else, because it's right. The only reason why I know more so about Palestinian is because my girlfriend, she works here, and she schooled me. I'm like, get out of here. Wow. But there was that appreciation, and that's why I'm here. I'm like, I want to know more, and because you're hungry for it if you want to be. Some people just don't care, and that's fine. They'll be where they are. Celebration times, do that. And then when you start getting comfortable, because you're like, I know you, whatever, and then it's like, okay, because feel connected. I wanted to use the F word, which is friends. Everybody, get your mind out of there. When you use the F word of call friends, or you feel, or acquaintances, then you feel that pull of, it's Thursday night, that's dinner, but I'll come. And then you feel renewed again, because, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just thinking, because I have been in those DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, where there is some, and always the white people feel guilty. They'll be fine. But they almost feel guilty, or we have to explain it, and blah, 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 and it's just exhausting.
I couldn't agree more.
So celebrate here.
No, right.
From me, please.
What's celebrate? I don't know. You want to come on? You sure? You're doing really, really good.
No. You're making me love all of this. If I can help you, just something. And you know what? The first year, nobody will come. Yeah. Maybe, but keep doing it. It's like if anybody can like, you know, Fergie's music, which is like a fungus, just keep doing it over and over.
I love it.
Just keep going. Just keep.
I have not heard it described that way, but I like it. I like it. You see all these different perspectives. You see, we can find all new ways, right?
Yeah.
Look at what you're saying, and this is, I think, so important. I say in a different context when I'm talking to white people about race equity, but this really, really pertains to this. Even the word solidarity, like when I think about solidarity, automatically when I think about solidarity, I think about just like being kind of together for the fight, you know, like kind of like even sometimes I've signed like off my emails like in solidarity, meaning like we're joined together in the struggle, right? Like that's to me when I hear it, what I hear is the association. I think what I love about what you're saying is this, which is like to me, I will only struggle with what I care about.
Yes.
That's the only thing I'm gonna really struggle with, because I got my own struggles. So if I actually don't care, then I'm not going to struggle with you. Even if I think what you're doing is, what you're experiencing is bad, wrong, horrible, all these kinds of things. I'm in my own struggle. Like we all communities of color are in our own struggle. So to me, this becomes, I'll keep saying this again and again. It's about the relationship, right? Like I will show up because I care about you.
That's right.
And I care, I see you being impacted. And now, because we're connected, if you're impacted, guess what? I'm impacted now, right? Like that is like, and I think part of, again, what I'll say is part of the work I think in Arab American communities and all brown communities is that we also are susceptible to the narratives, the kind of limiting belief stories, the stereotypes of blackness. And the only way to actually work through that and actually see the truth of what blackness brings into the space and who black folks are is actually to be in relationship with black people, right? To actually be in proximity to black folks. So we're not gonna see something and say, well now, we're just getting, I think, in this, and this is again where there's parallel things, like the amount of information coming into the general public about what it means to be Arab American, right? And all of it is related to some version of a threat, some version of danger, some version of less than, some version of all this kind of stuff. Well, guess what? That's the same narrative, right, that shows up about blackness. And we're all kind of unconsciously consuming culture that way. So that we have to understand that these narratives are coming in and that we're all susceptible to that. And so it becomes that much more important that, like, look, for us to get out from underneath these narratives, we've got to be able to collectively challenge them. For us to collectively challenge them, we actually can't believe them about each other, right? For us to not believe each other, we actually have to be in relationship. And once we're in relationship, we start to care, right? And once we care, now we're in solidarity. Now we don't have to call it solidarity. We're just like, we're down with each other. Call it whatever you want to call it, right? Like, I'm ride or die kind of situation is how, you know, like there's a character in the book named Frowaney who's a black woman, and we would probably both call it as ride or die. Like, right? That's solidarity, right? That only comes if we're actually in relationship and we're making the time to actually be in proximity with one another. Mm-hmm.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to bring into the conversation that there is also Black Arabs.
Yes.
One of them, I exist at the intersection.
That's right.
Thank you. So being Sudanese American, I live at this intersection of Arabness and Blackness and not being enough for either one. And so you're kind of faced with the racism that exists in our systemic nature, but also the racism that exists within other Arabs. And so it kind of makes it very unique of an experience. And on top of that, I think it's also important to note that me being an African Arab, a Black Arab who immigrated here, my experience is totally different from Black people in this country then, right? And even within Black people in this country, I'm not Black enough.
Right.
So you're kind of like, where do I fit in within all of that? And so I think it's just something that we always forget, that when we're talking about Blackness and Arabness, we're looking at them as mutually exclusive when they are actually very mutually inclusive to one another, and they overlap. And so that's just a note that I wanted to bring in the conversation.
And when you call it a unique experience.
Yeah.
If you were to be a little more, if you were to go into the experience is unique. When you mean unique, what is it? What is the experience of being kind of in the?
I mean, it's exhausting. That's what I meant, actually.
Right. Uh-huh.
But I called it unique to be more positive. But, but it's actually very tiring. Because I've always kind of lived in between all of these different things. I'm a spoken word artist, so I try to navigate those identities through poetry. And it's just something that's very difficult for me to synthesize, that like, I'm not enough for any of those identities. And at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, like I'm just Sudanese. I'm gonna stick to that identity because that at least is something to root me, right? Because I can't just say I'm Arab, because then Arabs look at me, like light-skinned Arabs look at me like questionably, and then Africans are like, you're not African either. And also, I think my relationship with my Arabness has kind of shifted a lot. Oftentimes I would like not accept it because I don't see that solidarity with other Arabs. For example, in 2019, Sudan had a revolution in which we overthrew our dictator for 30 years, and the Arab nations turned their backs on us when it was us who were in solidarity with other Arab countries during the Arab Spring, during all of those times, to the point that Sudan wanted to be accepted by the Arabs and the Arab League so badly that we changed our flag to unite with all the Arab countries. It looks exactly like Palestine's flag, but the colors are rearranged. But that wasn't enough, right? And so we saw in 2019 that a lot of Sudanese people were going back to the old Sudanese flag that was like green, yellow, and blue, that aligned more with African country colors because of that sense of betrayal. And so since then, I kind of, at that time, especially in 2020, when everything was going on in America with Black Lives Matter, I kind of felt like within my own community, a lot of people's true colors showed up and showed out. And it kind of put me in a really tough situation where I almost felt like I can no longer, I hated saying I'm Arab. I'm like, ugh, you know what I mean? And so it's been a difficult journey trying to reclaim my Arabness and understanding that my Blackness is rooted in, it's like my Blackness is nothing new to the Arab identity. Matter of fact, OG Arabs are Black. We don't talk about the Black Palestinians. We don't talk about the Black Lebanese people. We don't talk about the Black Iraqis. And those are all communities that exist, that have been there in that land way longer than the other groups that have been there. And so there's just this complete erasure of it. And so when I sit at this intersection between all of these different identities, it's exhausting because I'm just like, I'm here. Why can't you hear me? Why can't you see me? You know what I mean? And it makes it very, very hard for me to stand in solidarity. For example, I'm gonna be very frank with y'all. I've been at the front lines for a lot of these protests, and unfortunately, a lot of protests for Palestine. Tell me why I would hear like non-Black Arabs say the N-word in protest. And I'm just like, I'm here trying to support you, and here you are degrading me. And so it puts me in a really, really weird situation where I'm like, my heart yearns to be in community and to be of support to those who are oppressed. But how is it that those same people are also oppressing me, right? So, yeah, it's exhausting.
I just thank you. And I appreciate you naming, just taking it from unique and to just keeping it real and talking about just the exhaustion of it. And I also appreciate you, when you were speaking, part of what I was feeling and then just reflecting on is every human being has a need to belong. and it just, being someone who's had those roots kind of severed in my own life, in my own kind of way, as you were speaking, there's just not a connection, and also just I don't know the word, just I can feel you, and the struggle to belong, and the pain that it feels when it's your own people that you're feeling like you can't belong with, or are struggling to include you into the equation, and no matter how hard you try, or no matter what you do, right? And I'm lost at why we do this to each other. Because we all lose when we do this to each other. If we want to, the more we want to treat blackness like it is the thing to move far away from, the more we all in a brown space just lose again. It's like we just resource every single time we play into anti-blackness. We keep resourcing the systems of exclusion that actually do that for us. That actually do that to us. That's all we do. So every time someone says the N-word to you, they just resource the person who's gonna call them the brown version of that, right? It's just gonna keep resourcing that system, and I just don't personally know why we do this to one another. You know, it's just like, So I also think that we can't unpack it, and we can't begin to address it if there aren't folks willing to share their experiences. And I know it can be exhausting sharing your experience again and again and all that. And so thank you. Thank you for bringing your experience into the space. And I from my experience with so many other people's experience in space. Thank you.
I just think it's all a product of colonization. And
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
We all got independent states because of colonization.
Yes, we do. That should be your next poem. Right? We all got an Independence Day.
So I think it's really funny that we forget that there is one enemy here, and not each other. We're the global majority.
We need to act like it. We need to, right?
Act
Like
minorities, and we're not.
I know, right?
What's his name? King Charles.
It's just always interesting to me when the oppressed becomes the oppressor. And you can see it playing out in the Palestinian experience in Israel. You can see it playing out in lots of different ways. It's very interesting to me how we're always trying to grasp one way or the other in terms of how to hold power over each other, right? Versus learning how to hold power with each other. It's so fascinating to me around how we do that. And it endlessly confuses me on why we would do something that continues just to hurt us. And I just think we get so far out of integrity when you're like, hey, I'm going to paraphrase what you said, what I heard. Like I'm having to rework on how to reestablish my Arab identity, all of that kind of stuff. I was just thinking like, wow, it's so interesting that that's your work versus that's our work. Right? Because really, you need to just keep being you, and we're the ones who actually need to do the work on like what it means to actually create a space where you don't actually have to fight for belonging. Right? And so again, this is where I'm saying like before we start reaching out and building bridges out, we have to take a deep look in on how we are showing up for each other. Right? I appreciate you doing the work because I agree we have to do it. No one else can do it, but to me, that's all of our work for sure. And you should not be alone in that struggle. So, thank you so much.
So I have a question for you. You talked about we need to be in a relationship before we can have real solidarity. So one of the challenges we've had is how do we bring people to be in relationship, or how do we create a situation where people can accept to be in solidarity without having had those relationships? Because, for example, in a moment where we need solidarity, you can show compassion and say, you know what, this may not impact me directly, but I understand, I have a sense towards justice, so I'm going to support it. That only gets you so far. That gets what's happening now, which is a few people show up to protests, of, you know, whether it's Arabs showing up to Black Lives Matter or Black people showing up for, or whatever it may be. That only goes so far. So the question is, I guess, how, maybe it's not a question, maybe it's more of a statement, but how do we create spaces where we are building relationships when our communities are so isolated and segregated from each other? And I don't know if there's an answer to that.
Yeah, please.
I love this. That's so good. Yeah. So I don't have a real point here, so bear with me while I do these mental gymnastics. But so what you just said right now, I think how we do it is this. And I think that us as human beings needing to like be perfect and needing to make meaning out of everything, don't understand that like the truth is not necessarily the sexy answer. So like, for example, and that's for lack of a better term, I'm sorry, but for example, I'm the friend that, let's say you and him are in disagreement and you come to me for advice separately. I'll critique him on what I think he needs to change. I'll critique you on what you need to change. You both hate me. I end up walking away the loser, but I don't want to say like I have the right perspective, but generally if you piss both people off, you're kind of like as neutral and as inclusive as can be. Right? Like it's ugly to say that, and it sounds so terrible the way I put it, but I think any real conversation that we have has to start with, and this is me diving into like the mentality of the white supremacy movement, I guess you can say. I think they might think that like what we mean when we say we want equality is we just want brown supremacy instead. And that's really deep, and it's a question that like, especially in times like this where it can radicalize people, you really have to sit and ask yourself, what do we actually want? Do we want equality, or do we want, because equality is not sexy. Equality is, so the only way we're gonna get through this thing is honesty, right? I think, for example, what she over there said, I don't know her name. What Allison said and what Khadijah said, very important. What you talked about, very important. But I think, for example, like as an Arab American person, I know that when my dad gets upset with the female people in our family, he's not actually, it plays into this stereotype of like, oh, we oppress females, and he's not actually saying that. He didn't grow up in an environment where he can communicate his feelings properly. So what he really means to say, for example, when he says, don't stay out past this time, or you're not allowed to hang out with guys, or you can't date until you're 40, he means, I love you and I'm scared. You know? And I think, for example, we get into a lot of situations where like, you hear transracial marriage or, like interracial marriage, as being a problem. And like a lot of people, like Arabic people will be like, well, I'm really pissed that the white family won't accept me as an Arab. Or a black person will say, I'm very upset that the Arabic family won't accept me. We need to start being honest as total communities about the little bit of bias that exists in all of us. All of us. And that means like talking to your friend that, might say the N-word and telling him like, no, shut it down. Like, no, that's not okay. But we can't continue to pretend like, we're good in this aspect and not good in this aspect. It does nothing. We need to, it kind of goes back to what I said in my first comment. So interracial marriages are generally, I don't want to say generally frowned upon, I don't like blanket statements like that, but I find that a lot of people, whether you're black or brown or whatever, you're trying to preserve your culture again. So it's not necessarily, for example, let's say I'm Muslim and I'm marrying a Christian woman. When the parents tell you, don't do this, it's not always necessarily saying I'm against Christianity or I'm against Islam. It's more so we're trying to save you from the challenges that come with this because we're not sure you know how to navigate it. When the kids are born, for example, what religion are the kids gonna be? So I think that those conversations are really important. And honestly, it really just seems like, these are just my thoughts, but it really just seems like this is going to be a thing because human beings are flawed. This is going to be a thing that we can never stop doing until the end of time. But I hope that we get to a place where there's a better definition of what equality means overall.
There is so much said right now that I identify with. I mean, it makes me think back to what you said is you have to go within, right? I remember going to Tigard High School. I was the only non-white in that high school for my 4 years there. And then I moved to Canada. And while I was in Tigard, I felt special because everybody questioned, oh, you're from Africa, you're this, you're that. My naivete kind of accepted it as praise. My name was changed, everything was kind of played around with, whatever it was. I moved to Canada and I became part of the brown world. For the first time, I was amongst my own community, and it's a big one in Toronto. And I was completely happy. Through my volunteer activities, I got to know a lot of different people, and my white world became larger. And I remember when Black Lives Matter came, I was influenced, and I was a little bit there. But it was like it wasn't really touching me. That's as honest as I can be. But I had white friends who constantly made fun of it. I didn't let go of them because they were important to me. And now with the Palestine situation, it's become even more pronounced. I was talking to Jenna earlier, and actually I wrote down what she said to me. We have a friend who is racist. She's white, she's completely racist. But I always say, keep your friends near, your enemies even more near. So I'm always open to hear what she's saying because it kind of gives me a little bit of an idea of what the world is thinking. And this daughter of mine told me that, Mom, you're bloody well just protecting yourself. And she's right. I am. I'm protecting my friendship. I'm protecting her in some ways because I don't really know how to deal with it. I don't know how to move forward with it. It's a long-term relationship. And it just brings to mind that white has currency. Her opinions are not challenged right now, even by me, who's brown, who's feeling it. So I totally understand. So, it's so complicated, and as you peel the layers one by one, it gets even more complicated, and more polarizing. So in light of that, is there a space where we can kind of get together on this right now? I know we talked about in happy times, or...
Can I just add one thing to that? Sorry. I'm Jenna, hey. So one thing I would add to that is we're protecting ourselves, but we're also playing the role we've always played. We're always having to bow down and accept that even though our truth is powerful, it doesn't matter, right? So, call a spade, it's a genocide. It's very obvious. But it doesn't matter in their eyes, and even if it does, it won't be worth the breath all the time, if that makes sense. So it's like, we just always have to succumb to the white opinion. The white opinion matters most. It'll always be the loudest, and that is the currency. So
I agree because they're so powerful, they can take it away. First of all, at least you acknowledged it. Happy breakup one day. Whenever you get encouraged, I understand, but that currency is major. They can take it away. They give it and take it away.
Yeah.
That's this new word now. But
bow down to it.
Yes, and I wanted to say that's what it is. It's so powerful. It's like if I say something and it's not real, but it's real. They can obliterate your whole trajectory of reputation. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just saying, but it's like middle school all over again, where they just. There was all of a sudden, it's like, why am I not invited to anywhere else? That belonging again. We all want to belong.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Do you want that kind of power though? Like, do any of us want that kind of power?
So let me tell you something, since you said, no, but let me just tell you something.
I'm genuinely interested.
No, I
because
know, yeah,
struggle with that all the time.
this is a real situation. I don't know if I've told you this yet. I'm talking to you. When I was in elementary school, grade 6-ish, so I lived in Canada all of my childhood life until I was in my 20s. The point is this, I was being bullied. I had friends that were also similar to me, Caribbean parents. But the way in which recess, that was my best subject. Recess it was timed so that all the kids weren't outside at the same time. There was no room. So they I don't know what it's called, corralled it. They timed it out. So I always used to wait and hope that it was some of my friends, because they also separated us from whether it was deliberate or not. And there was many a times where it was just me. I was the one brat, but they were Chinese, Filipinos, Indian. I can name them because that was all the places they went. But when I was by myself, I was by myself. So I got cornered, the Julie thing. And then it was the bullying and being called the N-word. But one time, so I remember his name, Leon Chan. He was at recess with me, and I can't remember what it was because this is many years ago, decades. They switched to him, but I remember this, and I joined in. Chinese, the bad word, Chinese, and it felt good. I'm not proud of it, but it felt good, and I was proud of that moment. It's like sugar. It's like sugar. I know I shouldn't be eating this cake, but it tastes so friggin' good. And that's what we have to obliterate. Get on that whatever diet. I'm just saying, it isn't something that we want, but just like how you named it, being so brave. And I can say, well, I was a kid. Yeah, but it was wrong. And I went home, I told my mother, she was like, that wasn't nice. And I'm like, but it felt good. But it wasn't right. And that's what, as adults, I can say, well, I was a kid, but as adults, I think we've done that in versions. I can't tell you as an adult when, not because I just can't think of it right now, but I'm sure I have, because it feels good to belong, whether it's fake belonging, and it feels good to be acknowledged, and we've got so much work to be done. We've got so much work to be done. Yeah, so anyway.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this up. There's a scene in the book, because there's two things you mentioned that I think is important to name, which is, hey, they can take it away.
Yeah.
So there's a scene, actually, and this is where, for me, it was a life-changing and a professionally speaking, changing moment. It's towards the end of the book in this section around work. And there's an Indian woman who is challenging racism and all this kind of stuff going on. And for a lot of different reasons, I didn't pay attention enough and hold this white CEO accountable, right? And at the end of the day, there's a bunch of people of color in that scenario. They're all hurt. So, and mostly when I see these things play out, it ends up being women of color. Men of color are certainly hurt in this, and I see in a very pronounced way women of color really getting impacted in this way. And that moment really had me realize a couple of things. One, absolutely, like I don't think you don't really know whiteness until it's threatened. And that it has no problem dismissing, taking away, all those things. And so we've got to really learn how to discern when to speak up, how to speak up, all that. More importantly, what I started realizing was like, okay, we keep trying to figure out how to speak to white people and challenge white people, all those kinds of things. And I think that really is important. But mostly I thought like, my focus is in the wrong place. I don't really want to figure out how to become powerful like white people, anything like that. I do want to figure out like how, because I think when you talk about it felt good, part of what I wonder about is if it just felt powerful. Like if it just felt like, wow, I'm in control, like I'm, and I have this sense of belonging, all these kind of things. So I just figured out, I started to ask myself, where does like the kind of power that I want to feel live? Not power over people, but like power with people. Where does that live? And given that that's not a white paradigm, like that's not how white people relate to or think about power. Power and white supremacy and whiteness is always over. But it hasn't necessarily been my experience with Black and brown communities. So certainly we have those moments, but I've also seen that there's more of a community orientation when it comes to Black and brown cultures. And so I wanted to be able to say to myself, like, okay, how do I now direct my attention not towards white people, but towards Black and brown folks? And what does it mean not to have power over, but just to empower one another? Right? And so we're not fighting for senses of belonging and all that stuff. And I also felt like if we are going to challenge, that better come collectively, because that's going to be the safest way to challenge.
But there's no but. I agree that I don't take what I said back.
No,
the other thing that I do as you're talking and we're helping me recall it is what Khadijah said, is that I was exhausted being the one being focused in on, that when they turned to Leon, I joined in so that I can, like, let me take it off. So I said it was powerful, but that's what I said, and I said it, but it was also it was taken off me, the focus was taken off me, and I felt a resurge. So maybe it was a mix of power, but also it was, thank God they're done with me right now.
Yeah. For sure.
Let me join in, deflecting, let me be a part of the group so I can just sneak away. And if I was to meet him again, which I probably won't, and I release it, but I'm going to say I would apologize, and he'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm sure. But that was really effective, that really touched me for so many years that I'll just remember never to do that again, which I did. I haven't, but maybe I have without realizing it in terms of taking away from myself. But
Here and then John.
I just wanted to challenge what you said.
Yes, go for it.
So I think about this all. I'm like, okay, if white opinion really matters like so much, and if like white supremacists are actually superior, if somebody was actually superior, why would they need to scream it to the world continuously? So I really think, and I'm amazed by the power of this, like buying into the delusion. Like I think really white people like really buy into that delusion and sold it to us, and we bought into it too. And that's what we need to realize. It's not actually true that their opinion is far more important and is far more that, but it's like they said that, they firmly believe that, and we bought into that delusion. So inside, like, yeah, I'm Black, but on the inside, I really want to channel like a white man. Like, you know what I mean? I really want to buy into that delusion. I wake up every day and I'm like, man, like, let me just act like a white man today. You know what I mean? It's powerful. Like, you can buy into that delusion too. That's what I'm saying. It's just like, if white supremacists are actually that superior, they would not need to continuously say it to the world.
That's great.
Okay, I don't have a comment necessarily. I just wanted to kind of bring us to a close. No, you're okay. I wanted also to note that Hanif will stick around for a little bit to sign books if you want to touch base. But before we do that, if there's any last kind of questions or way to close us out, going back to your agreement, Hanif, what is it? Expect to accept non-closure. So I will leave it to you to wrap up.
I want to bring it back to the book for a moment. Along with Black and brown relationships, you also center on father-daughter relationships. So my last question to you would be, how do you talk to Amina about Palestine situation, or just how do you raise her with intention? Because that's what you do. Can you share a little bit more about that?
And this may be a good way to close, because it also touches on a little bit of what you mentioned earlier. There's a kind of a myth, I think, that people of color, because they're people of color, know how to deal with all issues people of color. And clearly we don't, and including, like, we know how to talk about this stuff with our kids. And most of the people I've met with don't actually know how to talk about race, identity, any of these things with our kids. And it wasn't necessarily modeled really well with us. And so one of the experiences I had with my own mother and my father was that we never talked about race, identity, any of those things in our home. And that had a really big impact. And so For me with Amina, it was so important to me that we opened up and were in a consistent conversation around her identity. And I wanted her to know, I wanted her to grow a love for her skin and shades darker than her. And so that meant from the youngest age, we were in conversations about race and identity. And that was whether, from the very beginning, like from 0 to 5, Amina never had any white dolls, books by white authors, never watched a show that had white characters in it. Every doll she had was her light brown skin all the way to dark shades of black. Every book that she read, her light skin, all the way were black authors, brown authors, all that. Because I knew once she went into the public school system, I would lose kind of all control. So I wanted to build this like love of black and brownness and this association to it and like almost a rootedness in it. So what that's meant is that we've had to have lots of conversations about identity, about race, about the issues that show up. And I've sometimes, like when the family separations happen in the country, there's disagreements about how we had this conversation because I showed her images of like what was happening and all those kinds of things, and she was 7 or 6 or so. And there's sometimes I'm like, oh, did I go too far? Because also as a parent, I also want her to be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I want her just to enjoy life. And so even as we talked about Palestine and where she sits at that, and both first locating where is Palestine, what is it, what's the history, all those kinds of things. There's a part of me that was like, I want her to be connected to these issues that are showing up in the world. But there's also a part of me that also was kind of conflicted because she's also 11. And there's a part of me that just wants her so badly just to be a little girl and enjoy the world. And I just understand, though, that that's not the world that she's going to be operating in as an adult. And so part of the role for me as a father is to have her build a connection and a relationship to her cultures as well as other black cultures. And so to me, those are just, so there, to me, is a constant conversation. And I'll say one story, and then maybe I'll do a quick reading to kind of close this out that kind of touches on it. We were sitting, and this is maybe the power of, I love this, the power of white supremacy, because I always think like white supremacy is always so confident of itself, and then it gets so confident that I get unconfident of it. Like, so it's like it's so sure that I'm less than, then I'm like, am I less than? Like, shit, I thought I wasn't, but I guess I kind of am. I guess my opinion doesn't. I guess I should just bow down. And then when I stand up to it, it does get me in all kinds of trouble. So I learned really early and often that what I internalized, not the truth, but what I internalized was my opinion really didn't matter. That my role was to acquiesce. It was to create space and constantly tend to the comfort of white people. All of those things were kind of unlearnings for me. And so part of my parenting with Amina has been really about building as much confidence in her voice and having her see that there's nothing wrong with who she is. And so we had this funny moment. There's the Marvel stuff, so a long time ago we went to this movie and it was Captain Marvel. And we watched it, and at the end of the movie, because Marvel's almost has all male superheroes and all this kind of stuff, so I was like, don't you think that it was cool that they finally had a woman superhero? And she's like, yeah. And mind, she's 7 at this point. Yeah, but it would have been cooler if she had been like brown or black. Like, why couldn't they have made her brown or black? And I just thought it was super cool because in that moment when I was her age, I would have seen a white male superhero, and I would have said, there's something wrong with me. And she sees a white woman superhero and she says, oh, there's something wrong with that. And that, to me, as a parent, was like a really heart-filled moment. And it comes from just constant conversations about who she is, what she wants to be about. Even as we talked about Palestine, we were talking about like, hey, instead of saying this whole group is, like, yes, genocide is wrong, but instead of saying this whole entire group is wrong, where do you stand? And like, how can you just stand for something like justice? And can you say, like, what's happening in Palestine is not just, and I don't stand for anything. Like, so we're trying to have her think about these kinds of issues in that way. So I'll give you an example. There's a passage in the book, and maybe it hits to this idea of belonging and all the stuff that we've been talking so much about. Quick passage of the book. And one thing about the book is, if you read the book, I'll say there's so many, I really hope if people read the book, they read it with somebody. When I wrote it, I didn't write it actually for people to read individually, because there's a massive amount of nuance in the book. So when you read a story, what's actually happening is not actually, it's kind of not even the point. There's a much deeper point, and there's a series of relationships that are being strung together that I would ask the reader to say, like, why are these relationships, why did he choose these particular relationships, and what's he saying about relationship? So there's a passage in the book called Home, which is, if you read the book, something I'm struggling with the entire book. What is home really? It's a question that I've previously avoided because of the vulnerability elicited, and maybe more importantly, because I was afraid of where the answer would take me. Now I begin to see home not as a place, but rather an experience and a feeling. For me, when I was young, it could be found in a game of basketball. Home was the coffee shop that Frowanie's father sat in every day. It's the neighborhoods of Northeast Portland for Ethan, Nikki, and Frowanie. Marisol was trying to bring me back home at that conference, and through all the intentional conversations she had with me, I felt more at home with Gerardo after he told me to just be myself. Home is an ease, a familiarity, and a belonging, a sense of rooted belonging. A rooted belonging which is safe enough to show up authentically, where our authentic self is seen, appreciated, and unconditionally loved. Home holds us to our highest and best selves, and it seems to have a way of compassionately holding us when we're not. Home has a way of reminding us of who we really are. Being home doesn't mean pain, disappointment, or frustration are absent. There's room for all of that in home. What home needs from us is to heal, take responsibility, learn to forgive, and continue to grow when the inevitable pain, disappointment, and frustration arises. A few days after Thanksgiving, Amina and I are taking a dad-daughter walk in Pier Park, a 90-acre patch of forest near our home in the St. John's neighborhood in North Portland. The park is filled with tall Douglas firs with the occasional sequoia, madrone, maple, and cedar trees. I tell her about how the trees in the forest literally talk to each other. There are forests whose roots run deep and are connected to each other. Their roots are how they communicate, sending messages. They warn each other when danger is nearby. They take care of each other. If and when one tree is sick, the other trees send nutrients to that tree. Together, they are able to create the right climate, letting in just the right amount of light and heat and wind and moisture they need to thrive. Together, they do what no tree alone can ever do. When humans interfere and plant trees in isolation, like the trees you see on city streets, the roots are irreparably damaged, so the tree can't communicate with others. They never grow as tall or live as long as trees in a forest because they're isolated. They just can't thrive in isolation. Even at 9 years old, she can pick up the significance. I remind Amina that her roots run just as deep as those of these trees, and she is also connected to something bigger than just herself.
On behalf of Hanif and the family, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time to be here today. We especially want to thank Rima, Jumana, the entire Access team for having us. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. And as she said, Hanif will be available. And thank you all very, very much. And let's look towards a forward-looking map and how we move on and connect.
And being in relationship.